Sarah Mitchell stood in the crowded hallway of Walter Reed Medical Center, clutching her new employee badge so tightly that the plastic edge bit into her palm. At 24 years old, she was the youngest nurse on the military trauma ward. She was also the only one who had never served. "Out of the way, rookie." Staff Sergeant Davis brushed past her without a second glance, his voice sharp with irritation. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, her cheeks burning. It had been like this for 3 weeks. The other nurses, nearly all of them veterans, treated her like she was invisible, or worse, like she was a liability. Sarah had graduated top of her nursing class, but here, that meant nothing. What mattered was whether you had worn the uniform, whether you understood what these patients had been through. "She probably can't even handle the sight of blood," she heard someone whisper near the nurse's station. Quiet laughter followed. Sarah blinked back tears and headed toward the supply closet. She would not cry, not here, not where they could see. Her phone buzzed. A text from her grandmother. "How's my brave girl doing? Your grandfather would be so proud." Sarah smiled despite herself. Grandpa Joe had been a Navy corpsman in Vietnam. He was the reason she had wanted to work with veterans in the first place. He had died 2 years ago, but his stories had stayed with her. Stories of courage and brotherhood. Stories of the men he had saved and the ones he could not. Before he passed, he had given her something. A small piece of paper with words written in his shaky handwriting. "Keep this," he had said. "You never know when the old ways might matter." Sarah had tucked it into her wallet, a connection to the grandfather she missed every single day. "Mitchell," head nurse Rodriguez appeared at the end of the hall, her expression stern. "We need you in Trauma Bay 4, now." Sarah's heart jumped. She hurried after Rodriguez, her white sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. "What happened?" Sarah asked, trying to keep pace with the older woman's quick stride. "Emergency airlift from Afghanistan, Navy SEAL, critical condition." Rodriguez's voice was clipped and professional, but Sarah caught something else beneath it. Worry. "He's been asking for his K9. The dog flew in with him." They rounded the corner, and Sarah heard it. A low, rumbling growl that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Trauma Bay 4 was chaos. Doctors and nurses crowded around the doorway, but none of them were going inside. Through the window, Sarah could see a hospital bed surrounded by medical equipment, and in front of the bed, like a furry sentinel, sat the largest German shepherd she had ever seen. The dog's ears were flat against his head. His teeth were bared. Every muscle in his body was tensed and ready. "We can't get near him," Dr. Warren said, frustration clear in his voice. "The patient is stable for now, but he needs treatment. We need to start IV antibiotics, change his bandages, monitor his vitals. But that dog won't let anyone within 6 feet." "Can't we sedate the dog?" someone asked. "We tried." This came from a young man in an army uniform, probably the K9 handler who had accompanied them. "He's trained to resist sedation. Military working dogs are taught to stay alert even under extreme circumstances. And Ajax here, he's one of the best. He thinks he's protecting his handler." "So what do we do?" Rodriguez asked. "The patient's name is Lieutenant Commander Marcus Hayes. He's got shrapnel wounds, possible internal bleeding, and a fever of 103. We need to treat him." Everyone started talking at once. Suggestions flew back and forth. Call animal control, get a tranquilizer gun, wait for the dog to get tired. Sarah stepped closer to the window. She could see the patient now, lying still on the bed. His face was pale beneath his tan, covered in dirt and dried blood. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. But even unconscious, one of his hands rested on the dog's head. Ajax turned and looked directly at her through the glass. His eyes were dark and intelligent, protective, loyal. Sarah understood suddenly. This was not just a dog guarding a wounded soldier. This was a partner refusing to leave his fallen brother behind. "I'll do it," Sarah heard herself say. The hallway went quiet. Everyone turned to look at her. "You," Nurse Davis laughed. "The rookie who's been here 3 weeks. You're going to walk past a trained-attack dog." "I'll do it," Sarah repeated, her voice stronger this time. Dr. Warren shook his head. "Absolutely not, it's too dangerous." But Sarah was already remembering her grandfather's stories, the old ways he had called them, the traditions that soldiers passed down. She reached for her wallet. Rodriguez studied Sarah's face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there made her nod slowly. "If you're sure," Rodriguez said, "but at the first sign of aggression you back out immediately. Understood?" Sarah nodded. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them steady as she pulled the folded piece of paper from her wallet. Her grandfather's handwriting stared back at her, words she had read 100 times but never fully understood until now. Dr. Warren stepped aside reluctantly. "This is against my better judgment." Sarah barely heard him. She was focused on the door, on the dog beyond it, on the wounded man who needed help. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Ajax's growl deepened immediately. He rose to his feet, positioning himself between Sarah and the bed. His lips pulled back further, revealing impressive canines. The message was clear: come closer and face the consequences. Sarah stopped just inside the doorway. She did not advance. She did not raise her hands or try to appear non-threatening in the usual ways. Instead, she did something her grandfather had taught her from his own time in the service. She stood at attention. Not the casual posture of a civilian trying to look military, but the real thing. Shoulders back, chin up, eyes forward, the stance of respect, of recognition. Ajax's ears twitched forward slightly. Sarah swallowed hard. Then she spoke, her voice clear and steady, using the words from her grandfather's paper. "Steady warrior, your watch is honored." It was an old phrase, one that military dog handlers had used decades ago. A code that told a K9 that a trusted person was approaching, that the mission was being transferred to capable hands. Ajax's growl faltered. His head tilted slightly, confusion breaking through his aggressive posture. Sarah took one careful step forward. "Steady, warrior. Your watch is honored. You've done well. You've kept him safe." The dog's tail, which had been tucked tight against his body, lowered slightly. Not wagging, but no longer rigid with threat. Behind the glass, Sarah could hear urgent whispers. Someone said her name. Someone else told everyone to be quiet. She took another step, then another. She was close enough now to see the blood on Ajax's dark fur, close enough to see how the dog swayed slightly on his feet. He was exhausted, probably injured himself. "You're a good boy," Sarah said softly, shifting from the formal code to gentle words. "You're so brave, but your handler needs help now. Will you let me help him?" Ajax looked up at the bed where Lieutenant Commander Hayes lay unconscious. The dog whined softly, a sound of confusion and distress. He was trained to protect, but he was also trained to trust certain signals. And something in Sarah's words, in her stance, in the old code she had spoken, had reached through his training to the loyal heart beneath. Sarah extended her hand slowly, palm down, fingers relaxed. "I'm here to help," she whispered. "I promise." For 5 long seconds, nothing happened. Ajax stared at her hand, then at her face, then back at his handler. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then Ajax stepped forward and pressed his nose against her palm. The breath Sarah had been holding rushed out all at once. Relief flooded through her. She gently touched the dog's head, feeling the warmth of his fur, the tremble of exhaustion in his muscles. "Good boy," she whispered. "Such a good, brave boy." Behind her, the door burst open. The medical team rushed in, but Sarah held up her other hand. "Slowly," she said. "He's trusting me, but he's still on edge." Rodriguez understood immediately. She moved with deliberate care, approaching the bed from the opposite side. Dr. Warren followed, his movements equally measured. Sarah kept her hand on Ajax's head, murmuring reassurance as the team began their work. They started an IV line. They checked Hayes's vital signs. They cleaned and redressed his wounds with practiced efficiency. Ajax watched everything, tense but no longer aggressive. Every few seconds his dark eyes would flick to Sarah's face, as if checking that she was still there, still keeping her promise. "He's got significant blood loss," Dr. Warren reported, his voice low. "Shrapnel wounds to the shoulder and leg. The fever suggests infection. We need to get him to surgery within the hour." "Vitals are stabilizing," Rodriguez added. She looked at Sarah with something that might have been respect. "Good work, Mitchell." Nurse Davis had entered as well, carrying supplies. She glanced at Sarah with an unreadable expression, then focused on her tasks. As they worked, Sarah noticed something. Hayes's hand, the one that had been resting on Ajax's head, was moving slightly. His fingers twitched. His lips moved soundlessly. "He's trying to speak," Sarah said. Dr. Warren leaned closer. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, can you hear me?" Hayes's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with fever. His lips formed a single word: Ajax. "He's right here," Sarah said quickly, guiding the dog closer. "He's safe, you're both safe." Hayes's hand found Ajax's fur. The dog pressed against the bed, whining softly. For just a moment, Hayes's eyes cleared. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and something like recognition crossed his face. "You spoke. The code," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "My grandfather taught me," Sarah said. "He was a corpsman, Navy like you." Hayes's lips curved into the faintest smile. Then his eyes closed again, and his hand went limp. "He's unconscious again," Dr. Warren said, "but stable. Let's get him prepped for surgery." Part 3: The Mockery. The surgery took 6 hours. Sarah stayed with Ajax the entire time, sitting on the floor of an empty examination room while the dog finally allowed himself to rest. A veterinarian had checked him over and found minor injuries, exhaustion and dehydration, but nothing critical. Sarah had hand-fed him water and food, speaking softly the whole time. Ajax had eaten reluctantly at first, then with more enthusiasm. When he finally fell asleep, his head resting on Sarah's lap, she felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She had done it, she had helped. Rodriguez found her there 2 hours later. "Hayes is out of surgery. He's going to make it." Sarah looked up, relief washing over her. "And Ajax?" "The vet says he'll be fine. They're quite a pair." Rodriguez sat down on the floor beside Sarah, which was so unexpected that Sarah almost laughed. "Where did you learn that code?" Sarah told her about her grandfather, about his stories from Vietnam, about the piece of paper he had given her before he died. "He said the old ways still matter," Sarah explained. "I didn't really understand what he meant until today." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Your grandfather was right, and you did something today that none of us could have done. You should be proud." For a moment, Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. Recognition, respect. But that warmth did not last long. By the next morning, the story of what had happened had spread throughout the hospital. But the version Sarah heard whispered in the break room was not the one she remembered. "Did you hear? The rookie got lucky with that K9. Lucky? More like the dog was just tired. He would have let anyone through eventually. I heard she was just standing there frozen, and the dog decided to ignore her." Sarah stood outside the break room, her coffee growing cold in her hand. She should have known. One moment of success would not erase 3 weeks of being dismissed. She pushed through the door. Nurse Davis and 2 other nurses sat at the table, their conversation stopping abruptly when they saw her. "Oh, Mitchell," Davis said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We were just talking about you." "I heard," Sarah said quietly. "Look, what you did yesterday was fine," Davis continued. "But don't let it go to your head. You got lucky. That dog was exhausted. Anyone could have walked in there." "That's not what happened," Sarah said, her voice stronger now. I used to code that. A code? One of the other nurses laughed. What, like a magic spell? Come on, Mitchell. We've all been around military dogs before. They're trained animals, not mystical creatures. Sarah felt her face flush. My grandfather. Your grandfather, Davis interrupted, standing up, was not here. You were. And you happened to be in the right place at the right time, that's all. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to explain, but the expressions on their faces told her it would not matter. They had already decided what they believed. She left the break room without another word. The rest of the week was worse than before. Now, instead of just ignoring her, the other nurses made subtle jabs. They gave her the worst shifts. They assigned her to the least critical patients. They made sure she knew that her moment with Ajax and Hayes had changed nothing. Sarah thought about quitting, about finding work at a civilian hospital where her credentials would matter more than her lack of military service. But every time she passed by Hayes's room, she remembered why she was here. He was recovering well, though still weak. Ajax had been allowed to stay with him, curled up on a special mat beside the bed. The two of them were healing together. That was worth something. That had to be worth something. On Friday afternoon, Sarah was restocking supplies in the storage room when she heard voices outside. She recognized them immediately. Dr. Warren and Rodriguez. I'm telling you, she's wasted here, Rodriguez was saying. The other nurses won't give her a chance. She's young, Dr. Warren replied. She needs to prove herself. She already did. She got past that K9 when none of us could. She saved Hayes's life by getting us access to him. Or the dog was simply too tired to care anymore. Dr. Warren's voice was dismissive. I've read the incident report. There's no evidence that any code made a difference. The most likely explanation is that the animal was exhausted and no longer perceived us as threats. Sarah's hand stilled on the box of gauze she had been holding. You can't seriously believe that, Rodriguez said. I believe in medicine and science, not folklore, Dr. Warren answered. Mitchell seems like a competent enough nurse, but let's not attribute more to the situation than what actually occurred. Their voices faded as they walked away. Sarah stood alone in the storage room, surrounded by neat rows of medical supplies, and felt something inside her harden. They did not believe her. They would never believe her. She finished her shift in silence, mechanically going through the motions. When it was time to leave, she walked past Hayes's room one last time. Through the window, she could see him sitting up in bed, reading. Ajax's tail thumped against the floor when he saw her. Hayes looked up and smiled. He raised one hand in a small wave. Sarah waved back, then kept walking. At least someone knew the truth. 2 weeks passed. Hayes continued to recover, and Sarah continued to endure the cold shoulders and dismissive comments from most of the staff. She kept her head down, did her job, and tried to remember her grandfather's words. Sometimes being brave means just showing up, even when no one wants you there. She was changing IV bags in room 312 when Rodriguez found her. Mitchell, you have a visitor, Rodriguez said. Her expression was odd, caught between surprise and something else. Trauma Bay 4. Sarah's heart skipped. Is Lieutenant Commander Hayes okay? He's fine, just go. Sarah walked quickly to Hayes's room, her mind racing through possibilities. Had his condition worsened? Had something happened to Ajax? She pushed open the door and stopped short. Hayes was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had seen him. Ajax sat beside the bed, alert and healthy. But they were not alone. 3 men in Navy uniform stood around the room, their posture respectful but their expression serious. And in the corner, looking distinctly uncomfortable, stood Dr. Warren. Nurse Mitchell, Hayes said, his voice warm, please come in. Sarah stepped inside, confused. Sir, I don't understand. Is everything all right? Better than all right, Hayes said. He gestured to the men around him. These are some of my teammates. They flew in this morning. He pointed to each man in turn. Lieutenant Ramirez, Petty Officer First Class Johnson, and Senior Chief Maxwell. Each man nodded at Sarah. Their eyes held something she had seen before in her grandfather's gaze. Recognition, respect. I asked them to come, Hayes continued, because there's something that needs to be set straight. He looked directly at Dr. Warren. Doctor, you've been telling people that Nurse Mitchell just got lucky. That Ajax let her through because he was tired. Is that correct? Dr. Warren shifted uncomfortably. Lieutenant Commander, I meant no disrespect to Nurse Mitchell. I simply offered the most logical explanation for. The most logical explanation, Hayes interrupted, his voice taking on an edge, is that she knew something the rest of you didn't. Something that saved my life. Senior Chief Maxwell stepped forward. He was an older man, probably in his 50s, with gray at his temples and scars on his hands. Doctor, what do you know about military working dog protocols? They're trained animals, they follow commands. They're not just trained animals, Maxwell said. They're warriors, partners, and they're taught specific codes and responses that go back generations, codes that most people don't know anymore. He turned to Sarah. Miss, may I ask where you learned the phrase you used? Sarah pulled out her wallet and retrieved her grandfather's paper. Her hands shook slightly as she unfolded it and handed it to Maxwell. The senior chief read it carefully and his expression softened. Joseph Mitchell, I'll be damned. I served with a Joe Mitchell in the 90s. Navy corpsman, retired by then, but he came back as a trainer for a few years. Taught us the old ways of working with K-9s. Good man. That was my grandfather, Sarah said quietly. Maxwell nodded and handed the paper back. Then you learned from one of the best. He turned to Dr. Warren. The phrase she used, steady warrior. Your watch is honored, that's old school. Vietnam era, it's a transfer of trust code. It tells a K-9 that someone worthy is taking over the watch. Most handlers don't even know it anymore because modern protocols are different. But Ajax knew it, Hayes said, because I learned it from an old-timer when I first started working with K-9s, and I made sure Ajax learned it too. I never thought it would matter. Never thought anyone outside the K-9 community would know it. He looked at Sarah. But you did, and you used it perfectly. Dr. Warren was silent, his face pale. Lieutenant Ramirez spoke up. We reviewed the security footage from that day, Doctor. We watched Nurse Mitchell's approach. Her stance, her delivery, her body language, everything was correct. That wasn't luck. That was knowledge and courage. Ajax was ready to attack anyone who came near me, Hayes said. He's trained to protect wounded handlers at all costs. He would not have backed down from exhaustion. He backed down because Nurse Mitchell spoke a code he recognized. A code that told him she was safe, that I would be safe with her. The room fell silent. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. Furthermore, Senior Chief Maxwell continued, we've been hearing things about how Nurse Mitchell has been treated here, about how her actions have been dismissed, about how she's been mocked and underestimated. His voice hardened. That ends now. Dr. Warren found his voice. Senior Chief, I assure you, there has been no intentional disrespect to. Dr. Hayes interrupted. Nurse Mitchell saved my life, not just by getting your team access to me, but by having the courage to walk into a room with a 100-pound attack dog when everyone else was too scared to try. She earned her place here. She earned respect. Has she received it? The silence that followed was answer enough. Sarah finally spoke, her voice steady despite her emotions. It's all right, Lieutenant Commander. I'm just glad you're recovering. That's what matters. No, Hayes said firmly. It's not all right, and it does matter. He looked at each person in the room. I'm recommending Nurse Mitchell for a commendation. The Navy recognizes civilians who show extraordinary courage in service to our personnel. What she did qualifies. Sir, that's not necessary, Sarah started, but Maxwell shook his head. It absolutely is necessary, the senior chief said, and it will happen. A knock on the door interrupted them. Rodriguez stepped in, followed by Nurse Davis and two other nurses. They had clearly been summoned. "Ah, good," Hayes said. "I wanted to make sure the whole team heard this." He repeated everything he had said to Dr. Warren, his voice clear and firm. When he finished, the room was completely silent. Davis looked at Sarah with an expression that might have been shame, might have been respect, probably both. "Nurse Mitchell," Hayes said, "on behalf of myself and my team, thank you. You honored the old ways, you honored your grandfather's memory, and you honored us." Ajax stood and walked over to Sarah. He sat at her feet and looked up at her with those intelligent, dark eyes. Then he lifted one paw and placed it on her hand. Sarah knelt down and wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, and this time she let the tears fall. The commendation ceremony took place 3 weeks later in Walter Reed's main conference room. Sarah had tried to convince Hayes that it was not necessary, that she had just been doing her job, but he had been insistent. "Some things need to be recognized publicly," he had said. "Not for you, for everyone else, so they understand what courage looks like." Now Sarah stood at the front of the room in her best dress, her grandmother sitting proudly in the front row. The room was filled with hospital staff, military personnel, and even a few reporters. Hayes stood beside her in his dress uniform, still using a cane but looking strong. And at Hayes's feet sat Ajax, wearing a fresh K9 vest, watching the proceedings with calm dignity. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the hospital's commanding officer, stood at the podium. "We're here today to recognize an act of extraordinary courage and knowledge. On October 15th, Nurse Sarah Mitchell did what trained medical professionals and experienced military personnel could not do. She reached a wounded Navy SEAL whose life hung in the balance, protected by a military working dog who would let no one near." Sarah's hands were clasped tightly in front of her as Captain Walsh recounted the events of that day. Around the room she could see faces she recognized. Rodriguez, smiling with genuine pride. Dr. Warren, looking appropriately humbled. Nurse Davis and several others, their expressions a mix of respect and regret. "What makes Nurse Mitchell's actions particularly noteworthy," Captain Walsh continued, "is that she drew upon knowledge passed down from her grandfather, a Navy corpsman who served with distinction. She honored tradition, showed remarkable courage, and ultimately saved a life. It is my privilege to present her with the Department of the Navy Distinguished Public Service Award." Applause filled the room. Sarah stepped forward, hardly believing this was real. Captain Walsh pinned the medal to her dress and shook her hand firmly. "Well done, Nurse Mitchell," the captain said quietly. "Your grandfather would be very proud." "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Hayes stepped forward next. "If I may say a few words, Captain." "Of course, Lieutenant Commander." Hayes turned to face the room, his hand resting on his cane. "3 months ago, I was on a mission that went wrong. I won't go into details, but I ended up wounded and separated from my team with Ajax as my only companion. This dog," he reached down to touch Ajax's head, "carried medical supplies to me, defended me from threats, kept me alive for 18 hours until extraction arrived." He paused, and the room was utterly silent. "When we arrived here, I was barely conscious, but I knew Ajax wouldn't let anyone near me. It's what he's trained to do, protect at all costs. I couldn't call him off."